Hi friends, and welcome back to AmandaMuse. Today, as the title suggests, we are going to be jumping into co-sleeping. I'm going to be busting some myths. I'm going to be sharing with you my current sleeping situation. I'm going to talk to you how I co-sleep safely, and of course at the very end offer you some tips and tricks. I know co-sleeping can be a rather taboo subject. It's like one of these things that, I don't know, it's almost like a dirty little secret. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, but I'm here, and sometimes I overshare, so let's jump into it. In case co-sleeping and bed sharing is new to you, a new term, essentially it just means that children sleep in the bed with mom or dad or mom and dad. The setups are different for each family because what works for one may not work for another. So you could be looking at the sidecar situation where you have the bed and then you have the bed, the little co-sleeper that's up against the bed. You could have the co-sleeper in the bed. You could have just your child in the bed. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You can have the bed on the floor, the bed in the frame, like a big bed. You know, there's all sorts of different ways to do this. Again, whenever I share videos like this, I always talk about it from my own personal experience. I am but one woman, and so I can only speak from the one woman narrative and what's works for our family. And you know, what works on Mondays and Tuesdays doesn't always work on Wednesdays. I'll just give you that much. So let's jump into these myths and let's just shed light on some of the things, the common concerns that people have with co-sleeping. You know how I roll, right? You do you, whatever works for you. If your babies are sleeping in their own cribs at like 6 weeks old or whatever, I mean, and it works for you, then goodness me, keep it up. But this again is just an opportunity to be an advocate for those who do bed share and who co-sleep, or who are just curious about it and have questions, or maybe they've fallen into it accidentally and are like, how did I end up here? What am I doing? Is everything normal? So you're not alone, basically, is why I'm doing this. Backstory, if you're new, I have two kids, ages almost 3. Jack will be 3 in March, and Esme is 5 years old. And I sort of fell into co-sleeping accidentally, kind of, with Esme. I didn't know that I was going to be a full-fledged co-sleeper, although I did know I wanted her close. I had the co-sleeper, had the bassinet, I had the Moses basket type of thing. I had the co-sleeper that went into the bed, that one. And with my son, I ended up just, oh God, I'm a co-sleeper, and that's just the way she goes. So I'll share a little bit of that. But before I get into all of the personal stuff, I want to just bust some co-sleeping myths like right now, because I think when something is unknown or maybe something seems scary, we can come up with all these fears in our heads about something like co-sleeping, and I just want to like get rid of them right now. So just before this video, I Googled co-sleeping and I saw a bunch of really great articles talking about the various myths about co-sleeping and basically just busting them. So we're going to cover the top ones right now. Trusty book with notes. So the first one is that co-sleeping is always dangerous. I have a really hard time with the word always. It's very final and it's very all-encompassing. And the fact is, driving is dangerous sometimes, but not all the time if safety measures are taken. And that's the same thing to be said about co-sleeping. You know, simple things like no extra pillows or bedding, depending on, and by bedding I mean blankets, depending on the age of the child. You know, as a parent, do not co-sleep with a child if you've been under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Like simple things, you know. If you or your spouse are very heavy sleepers and would not be roused by, let's say, rolling onto a child, then let's not go down that road. Like, these are just simple things, and you know yourself and you know your family. So obviously safety measures are of the utmost importance. Interesting little fun fact is that when a mother and baby are sleeping next to each other, their breathing actually starts to stabilize each other. And there's scientific evidence behind this. So I'm not just pulling things out of the air here. Like, you can do your own research and come across this yourself. But it's just, I find that very fascinating. Like, a mother and child are so in tune that their breathing starts to stabilize and they can actually sleep better. Also, the baby is within arm's reach, and so should the baby have a little breathing apnea or something in the night where a parent should be there of concern, for example, the mother is right there, and a lot of the times a mother will stir before the child even has a chance to get all worked up with whatever the issue is. So one little personal story is a breastfeeding co-sleeping mama with baby Jack. So when my son was brand spanking new, we're talking like day 2, maybe day 3 of being home, He was struggling with the change of the air. So I had my children overseas in Malaysia, and it was obviously very, very hot, but we had air conditioning running in the house, and a lot of times there can just be, air conditioned air. It can cause a little bit of breathing, a little bit of a cold. So it seems like he caught a little bit of a cold in his first few days home. So here we were sleeping in the bed, and I'm not kidding, his breathing changed in terms of the amount of seconds he took between breaths, and I popped out of bed like there was a fire under my butt because I sensed a change in his breathing, and I popped out of bed so fast. I scooped him up with one hand, flipped him over, ready to do was there something stuck in his mouth? Should I be doing the baby Heimlich? What am I doing? And of course, at which point he kind of looked at me like, woman, I was just taking a longer breath. So it's just very fascinating to me how in tune a mother and child can be, especially in those early days, when every little squeak and grunt and, could mean something, which on the flip side is also really hard as a new mom. Fortunately, there is the internet, and there is endless information on how to co-sleep safely, even with pictures and diagrams, depending on your setup. But one rule of thumb is, definitely the child is not under blankets at a very young age, even under a year. Truth be told, my kids don't even love blankets, only up until recently. And like I said, Jack is almost 3. He hasn't loved blankets. I think it's like a safety thing. They almost protect themselves. They don't want anything to do with blankets. Maybe just my kids. I don't know. Let me know. Comment. No extra pillows or fluffy things in the bed. And if you are sleeping with your spouse in the bed and your child in the middle, for example, it's best that you each have your own blanket so that the blanket doesn't go across the child with potential to asphyxiate, right? Sounds a scary word, but you want the child to just basically be free of risk. Another myth is that no one you know is doing it, when in fact, I was actually surprised by this number, and now this number could be off, but something like 80% of mothers at one time or another will co-sleep. And it's safe to say that culturally, co-sleeping is seriously a non-issue outside of North America. I can only speak in places I've been, but I do get a lot of commentary and feedback from other people from various countries, and they say that it kind of baffles them why it's an issue, because it really isn't. It's such a simple, basic thing, but of course, as North Americans, we're not accustomed to it, so therefore it seems a little bit kind of out there, but it's not, my goodness. So lots of cultures bed share. Not a big deal. And I don't think it's a bad thing for at one time or another for you to go, you know what, I need to sleep. And maybe sleeping means breastfeeding while you're laying down and everybody sleeps. Can I tell you, it's hard for me to not interject personal things into these little moments, but I have never felt more success in my life until the day I mastered breastfeeding while laying down. It was the greatest experience. I was a little worried that the size of my massive breasts would I don't know, squish my child, but we both managed. We figured it out. And honestly, it's when you can sleep and breastfeed, especially with the amount that my babies would breastfeed, it was such a blessing to be able to just have them in the bed with me. Another myth is that you're going to spoil your baby, which is just ridiculous. When I hear spoil and baby in the same sentence, I'm just like, come on. Thankfully, there have been a lot of articles lately that have been shedding light on the fact that you really can't spoil a baby with love and affection and time and energy. It's just not possible. We're not talking about a 10-year-old here where, yes, they can certainly be spoiled, but babies can't be, so don't worry about it. Another one is that the child's going to lack independence, that they're somehow going to grow up to be these very dependent children, when, there have been a lot of studies to say that that's really not true, that children who co-sleep are just as independent and just as fearless as any other kid. My favorite myth, oh my God, this one makes me eye roll hard, is when people say that it's going to ruin the relationship with your husband. How could you possibly have sex if you're co-sleeping? Sex is one of my favorite topics. I don't talk about it very much on my channel. I don't know why. I think when it's something like the internet is forever and my children may one day discover this video, but I will say this, just be creative. If you can't find another place to have a little fun, then the fun part is really not the problem. Be creative, be spontaneous. Goodness me, there's more than places than just one bedroom. So, next. This one I found really interesting, and I didn't even think that it could be a myth or something that people would be worried about, but that you all have to go to bed at the same time. And I thought, Right, people might assume that if you're co-sleeping, everybody gets jammied up and goes to bed at the same time. Which, fair enough, in the early days, like I'm talking brand spanking new, home from the hospital, yes, I definitely went to bed at the same time. I think, especially because I had a 2.5-year-old at the time, or an almost 2.5-year-old, we were all bathed and jammied up by, I think it was like 7 p.m. and in bed by 8, and everybody was sleeping. And I was really blessed that Jack was a really good sleeper. He nursed really well and he slept really well, so I was pretty lucky in that sense. But yeah, at the beginning, sure. But I co-sleep now, and my kids are asleep, and I'm not there, and it's totally fine. So no, you definitely do not go to bed at the same time. In fact, I am very structured with my daily routine and my schedule in terms of sleeping. We follow the very same routine every night: bath, story, bed, every night at the same time. And my kids are very good sleepers. They sleep in. Being a co-sleeping kid or a co-sleeping family does not mean bad sleepers and does not mean no schedule. I think there is certainly that misconception that if you don't fit the norm in terms of the parenting style, that you're just completely wild and free and like no schedule, which is completely not the case. In fact, I'm more strict about certain sleep schedules and patterns than other people that I know whose kids don't sleep in their beds. So, you know, it's just very interesting. Another common myth is that you'll never get your baby or your children out of your bed if you ever start co-sleeping, which really, again, those very strong words like forever or you will never. I mean, who's to say? You know, this might be a very simple comparison, but if any of you have a dog, then you could probably relate. But if you have a dog and you want to switch their food, you don't just take out the old food and put in a new food, because the dog would probably puke everywhere. It's just the nature of their bellies. However, if you take the old food and mix some of the new food in every day, and you start to wean them off the old food and only have the new food, and it's a very gradual process, chances are they will take to the new food like it ain't no thing, and within a week to 2 weeks they will be right as rain. The same goes with any situation with children, whether it be introducing new foods, trying a new routine, you name it, starting school, changing beds. So, you know, nothing is forever. And God, did I laugh the other day. There was something going around where an article, it was a blogger, was writing about how, yes, she's co-sleeping right now, but the reason it doesn't bother her so much is because she knows that in another 18 years or so, her son will be co-sleeping, but it'll be an entirely different set of breasts that his head will be resting on. And oh my God, did I laugh, because I'm pretty sure that my son is not going to want to be snuggled up to me in bed every night of his life, like a guarantee. So it's not forever. So those were just some of the myths that I think certainly pass through a lot of people's minds when they think about co-sleeping. Co-sleeping, like a lot of not very accepted methods of parenting, like maybe extended breastfeeding, baby wearing, like a lot of these things are very mainstream now, or becoming very mainstream, but it's not always been that way. So there aren't a lot of resources for people in terms of like, how do you co-sleep and what is the setup? Because it is a very variable thing, and it's not going to work one exact way for everybody. So again, you take bits and pieces of what's going to work for you and you just make it work. Am I right? Now, in terms of the stages, like I could talk forever about co-sleeping, but I did highlight a couple of important tips and tricks depending on the age of your child. So if you have a newborn, a newbie, things like the co-sleeper, like I mentioned, you can get the Moses basket. You can also have the co-sleeper that's actually in the bed. It has like these tiny rails, they're probably about that big, just so that you don't roll onto your child. Or you can just take your kid and put them in the bed. So whatever works, as long as you're doing safety first, then it should be no issue. Things to remember is no extra pillows, no big fluffy blankets, just simply the blanket that you need to cover yourself. If your spouse needs a blanket, get them a separate blanket. And generally speaking, newborns and even just infants in general up to a year don't really use blankets. Someone had mentioned in the comments on my Facebook page, one of those grow bags. Those are great. You put them in their little jammies and then you zip them in this bag. It's like a zippable bag cover thing. My kids didn't really take to those very much, but in the early days I used those as well, just so they stayed warm, but you didn't need to put a blanket on them. Because when you have a brand new baby, their arms are not enough to like be able to move things from their face, and so you just have to keep everything away from their face, really. And if you do feel really insecure, or you're just not confident that you're gonna wake up or whatever, the co-sleeper is also just fine, because they're just arm's reach and you can pop them into the bed when you need them. So that's the newbie days. When you start getting to crawling days, to eliminate stress, what we did is I actually just put my mattress on the floor. I took the bed frame out of the room, the mattress was direct on the floor, and I put foam mats around the bed. and that was it. So if my baby did roll out of the bed, they were rolling off of this much and landing onto, you know, a foam mat, and that was that. But honestly, we didn't have that happen very much. My babies, you know, they basically stayed near my boob, so that is not near the edge of the bed, so they were fine. And I found that we tend to sleep kind of in the middle of the bed. Like I said, with my first, it was just me and Esme, and Dean was in the bed with us initially. My spouse was in the bed with us, but then he wasn't getting enough rest because he just kept waking up for her feeds, and then we were both not sleeping, and that's not a pretty picture, especially, like I said, with a spouse who has a very it's a very high stress job. Being a pilot of a huge, heavy aircraft is a high stress, and he needs to be rested. So I'm not saying he's rested all the time. And I'm pretty sure if he sees this video, he's gonna be like, lady, I was not rested for like 4 years. I get it, but he's rested more than I was. Okay. There's also a trick. I never did it because I couldn't get my hands on a pool noodle when I was in Malaysia. They kind of came and went in stock, and I didn't always have one. But if you wanted to put a pool noodle underneath your fitted sheet, it acts as a barrier where your kid won't roll over. It's like a stopper. So somebody tried that. That's cool. I did have the bed rails, but I kind of got annoyed with them in the end because then I kept having to crawl over the bed rail to get out of bed. So I just put my bed on the floor, and it's still on the floor because that's how I roll. Then the next phase was having a toddler and then bringing home a newborn. And really, you know, if you go back in the archives, I had actually started Esme in her own room, and she was sleeping in her own room. You know, she would still come into bed with me here and there, but we'd always go back to her bed. However, once the new baby came home, it's like she reverted back to just needing to be near mommy all the time. And you know what? I was too tired to do anything about it. And the only difference was that I was now sleeping in the middle. I had one baby on one side, one on the other, in a giant king-size bed. And a rail on one side so the newborn wouldn't move, and her side of the bed was up against the wall. So that's how we did it. Again, safety first, same rules apply, one pillow, one blanket, all the things, and we made it work. And now where we're at is that I do still have 2 kids sleeping in the bed with me, even though Esme has her own room. She just lately has felt more comfortable sleeping in the bed with me, and I just noticed that it must have been just with the start of school or something. I think it's just been a little bit of a change for her. She's had a big shift in her life where she's going from no school and that whole stay-at-home life to being at school and feeling a lot more tired. But every single night she was booking it down the hall and just jumping into bed with me. And it got to the point where I was like, what's the point of this? We're both getting woken up at 2 in the morning. Why not just come into my bed, start in my bed, and have a full night's rest? And so that's where we're at. Now, Jack is also in the bed with me, and as you know, I recently finished my breastfeeding experience, and so it's been like maybe 2 months now. I feel like it's going really quick. I could be wrong, but we were able to wean from breastfeeding, and he's still co-sleeping, and it's no big deal. He was also the easiest weaning from breastfeeding thing that I didn't even think children could wean like that, and you can go back and watch breastfeeding videos, but I was like, he just stopped. I was like, what? That was lovely. But we can still breastfeed. And like I said, you can just do whatever you want, like however the setup is. If you want to, you know, cut out breastfeeding at night and only breastfeed in the day, that's possible because I did that with my daughter. It ultimately led to weaning completely. Again, I have videos on everything, but you just can just do whatever you want, you know. And for the longest time, I was still sleeping in the middle with Jack and Esme on each side. And my husband, we have like musical beds in our house. He sometimes sleeps in my daughter's room. We have another bedroom. The poor guy. I'll get to him in a second. But it's always been me in the middle and the kids on the outside. But now that Jack's older, he wants to be closer to his sister, and he says, I want to cuddle Esme. So now he sleeps in the middle and I sleep on the outside, and everybody sleeps pretty good. You know, where am I going now with co-sleeping? It's coming to an end for us. I am ready for it to be done. And I've always said, like anything, parenting, you know, it's a relationship with your child. And so it's got to work for both parties. I don't know that you're ever going to be on the same page entirely, but you can always make some minor changes, right? So I've noticed that now that Jack is done with breastfeeding, like he doesn't need me necessarily to be there throughout the night in terms of a food source, right? And Esme is 5 years old and she has her own room. But what I'm noticing is that maybe because we have co-slept for so long, like we're just a really close-knit group when we sleep. We're like a pack of puppies, basically, a big old pile of puppies. And I just don't know that they're very comfortable sleeping alone. Do I blame them? Hell no. I was like the biggest, I just did not do well in the dark situation. Sometimes when I would watch scary movies, I would make my brother come and like sleep in my room on the floor. I'd set up a bed for him. He was very protective even from a young age. But, you know, I'd never liked being by myself. And really, I mean, if you are married, chances are you sleep in a room with your spouse. You're not alone when you sleep. So it's a kind of a weird thing for me to put my little baby or little child into a room by themselves. Again, personal preference. I do not judge if you do. Because a part of me is also like, God, wouldn't that be nice to just like close the door and people sleep on their own? I'm like back tickling and singing 1,000 songs and very involved goodnight process. But where I'm going with this is that basically I'm looking to have the kids share a room, and at first Dean was not cool with this idea. He's like, why would you have a brother and a sister sharing a room? My thought process is that it's an interim thing. It's just to get the kids used to actually sleeping in a bed without me, basically. So I'm looking at getting bunk beds and converting Esme's current room into a shared room where they would have bunk beds and they would just learn to sleep in a room together. Now, do I think this is going to be an easy process? Hell no. And truth be told, I'm not really rushing it right now. I'm thinking it'll be more like a spring-summer project because Jack is still very attached to me. Like, he will wake up probably in like the next half an hour or so because it's late. It's about 11 o'clock at night right now. So he'll wake up between 11:30 and 12, and certainly after that, and call for me and look for me. And he's very upset when I'm not there. Like, he's still very attached. But like going back to what I was saying before, you know, it's a gradual process. So I'm making plans to redo their room. And that's something that I think is a really big deal. If you are co-sleeping and looking to transition, make it really exciting and really fun to set up a room, get things that they like, let them in on the process. Maybe they can help paint or make their bed or pick their little light fixture they want to have in the room or whatever, you know, get those decals you can like stick on the wall. Whatever it is, if they're really excited about it, they're going to be on board. And of course, the nighttime routine is such that I'm involved. I don't just imagine that they're going to go from co-sleeping and this whole involved process to like just crawling into bed at night and going to bed on their own like that. And it's not going to happen, but we're going to work towards that. Because truth be told, it has been long enough that my husband and I have been sleeping in separate beds and we kind of miss each other. You know, it'd be nice to crawl into bed and maybe read a little book before bed, but I can't even do that because the kids are sleeping in the bed. So like I said, we're coming to the end of this co-sleeping thing, I think. My children may have other plans, but so far this is the plan. So in the next few months, you'll probably hear more of an update from me on that. I hope I was able to clear up any myths and just share with you how we do it and how we co-sleep now that we have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and just kind of what works for us. And you know, if you have any questions, then I would love to hear them below, and I can hopefully answer them and get to them either in the comment section or in a future video about co-sleeping. But I really appreciate you watching this video. If you enjoyed it, if you learned something, hit that thumbs up button. Why not, right? And be sure to subscribe if you're new. Otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday in the next weekly vlog. Thanks for watching. Bye, guys.